Hello and welcome to another edition of FSC Direct. We aspire to educate and inform the general public and industry practitioners on matters relating to the financial services business and our regulatory regime. My name is Monique Hodge, the Public Relations Manager at the BVI Financial Services Commission. Today, our topic is the VI Money Laundering Risk Assessment 2022. On June 9, 2023, the BVI Financial Services Commission, in conjunction with the BVI Financial Investigation Agency, published the VI Money Laundering Risk Assessment. In accordance with the National AML CFT policy and strategy, the Territory has committed to update its various risk assessments periodically based on intelligence gathered of developing risk, ensuring that the industry is aware and complies with the highest domestic and international regulatory standards and best business practice. The last sectorial review was done in 2020. Today, our panel consists of two. We have our Deputy Director of the AML CFT Unit, who is tasked with developing and implementing the Commission's AML CFT supervisory strategy. She is certainly no stranger to this platform. Welcome, Ms. Alva McCall. We also have with us one of our industry partners from the BVI Financial Investigation Agency, FIA. Join me in welcoming the Senior Compliance Examiner in the Supervision and Enforcement Unit at the FIA, responsible for the supervision of designated non-financial businesses and professions, Ms. Farial George. And now we begin with our questioning. We're going to first begin with Ms. McCall. Alva, please let us know give us an overview of what went into carrying out this assessment and the difference between this assessment and the assessment done in 2020.
Thanks, Monique, and thanks for having us. Well, the successful execution of this assessment was really based on a lot of collaboration between the FIA and the FSC, but not just us, but also all the other people and agencies that we had to get data from. We collected a lot of data, did a lot of analysis. So, it was a long process, but I think a very successful one in that the outcome was a very detailed report. Now, the difference between this one and the 2022 report, well, first, obviously, it's a combined report between the FSC and the FIA. In 2020, we each did separate reports for our respective sectors. This one is also more detailed. It has more focus on the national risks. The 2020 report for both FSC and FIA just focused on the sectors. We've paid more attention now to the risks at the national level as well as the risks at the product level. So I think those are the key differences between. And we also took a look at the institutional vulnerabilities of our law enforcement and competent authorities in addressing the risk at the national level. Right.
All right. So can you explain more about what sectors were covered in this 2022 report?
Sure. Well, for the FSC, we looked at the sectors that we supervise, which we refer to as financial institutions, and that includes the banks, the money services businesses, the financing businesses, insurance businesses, investment business, and insolvency business. And we also, obviously, company formation, registration, supervision, all of that is important to the BVI. So while trust and corporate service providers are not generally considered financial institutions, in the BVI they are, so because they're under the supervision of the FSC. So they were also included in the financial institutions section of the report, as well as the newest member of our financial institution sector, which are the virtual asset service providers. Well, Fariel can now tell you the different sectors under the DNFBPs that were also included in the report.
Okay. So over to you, Ms. Farial. You can give us those details about the
Thank you
sectors.
very much. Thanks, Monique. Thanks for having me, and thanks, Alva. So with respect to the 2022 money laundering report, it covers all of the sectors that we deem designated non-financial businesses and professions. And this includes legal practitioners and accountants that undertake relevant business within the Virgin Islands. It also includes the real estate sector, and it includes sectors which we look at as high-value goods dealers, and that would be yacht brokers, that will be businesses that undertake the buying and selling of vehicles, as well as the jewellery sector, jewellery stores, jewellery stores, as well as dealers in precious metals and stones. So they are separate sectors, and those were all of the sectors that we looked at when undertaking this assessment.
Okay, that's interesting, very interesting. Jewelry. So in your words, Ms. McCall, can you give us an overview of what the outcomes were of the 2022 Money Laundering Risk Assessment report as it relates to these various sectors that we're now learning about?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what we found from the financial institution perspective, and then I'll let Farial discuss the findings from the DNFBP sector. Overall, generally, there wasn't much movement between the ratings that were found in the 2020 report and the 2022 report, but we did see some downward movement, meaning we rated these sectors as being less of a risk in 2022 than we did in 2020, and that was in relation to money services and as well as insurance. And now, of course, there's a reason for that. I think you would remember after the 2017 hurricanes, we had various issues with insurance business, which caused the ratings when we did the 2020 assessment to be slightly elevated. But taking all of the things that we've put into place between 2020 and 2022, the control factors that are now in place, that has reduced the level of risk somewhat. So they were rated as medium-low in 2020, and now they're considered to be low. In terms of the money services business, again, we saw a lot of work being done by the FIA in relation to money services business in their filing of SARS and understanding the proper reasons for filing SARS. The FIA, did a lot of work on that. And I think that, along with other information that's detailed in the report, showed an improvement. And because of that, the level of risk was decreased. It went down from medium high to medium low.
So that's a good thing.
It's a good thing, but we still need to pay attention and be vigilant.
Yes.
We still need to make sure that whatever progress we've made, that we continue. And people just need to remember that they need to understand their risk. In terms of the other sectors, the ratings remain pretty much the same. For banking, it's medium-low. For trusts, the TCSPs, of course, are high, and that's just because of the general nature of their business. Yes. Investment business was rated as medium-high. Insolvency services was, that also went down to low as well. And then, of course, we looked at the virtual asset service providers, and they were rated as high.
Is that because it's new?
It is because it's new. It's a new sector. Up until February this year, it hadn't been under any supervisory remit, but they are now part of our supervision regime. So, but I think the details of how we got to these ratings are in the report. So, you know, people should pick up the report and just familiarize themselves with the actual intricacies of how we arrived at those conclusions.
Well, those ratings is very important. You mentioned how some sectors you saw a shift from one year to the next. Some were lowered or some were increased. What factors did you take into consideration when you came to the ratings or coming up with the ratings?
Well, like I said, a number of factors, and this is where the 2022 report differs from the 2020 report. we took a more granular approach in the 2022 report by looking at the different elements within each sector and how they impacted the risk. So we looked at customer risk, we looked at geographic risk, we looked at the overall sector characteristics, we looked at the products and services that the sectors provide, and we also looked at the susceptibility to abuse within the sector. So while those things were taken into consideration in 2020, in this 2022 report, we've gone into more depth in relation to understanding those elements and how they impact the risk of each of these sectors.
Okay.
Right. So I think Fariel, she has information on the DNFBP sectors, so I'll let her chime in. And
okay.
Thank you very much. So I think in terms of the DNFBPs, my answer would be similar to what Alva has just been talking about in terms of a comparison to the report that was undertaken within 2020. So what we did find is in terms of the work that we undertook in comparison to the 2020 sectoral risk assessment report, what we did find was some of the sectors did move their ratings. Okay. So with respect to the legal practitioner sector, they stay medium-high. And like Alva mentioned, that was as a result of various factors that we took into account. We went much more granular this time around, looking at more specifics within the sectors themselves. Yes. And the legal practitioner sector within the Virgin Islands is a decent amount sector. There is a significant amount of firms operating here, and at the end of the day that we found the medium-high rating was appropriate to them. Now, looking at the other sectors differently, their ratings did move. So where we have the remaining DNFBP sectors, which is the real estate, accountancy, and the other high-value goods dealers, they actually, compared to 2020 when they were rated medium-high, in the 2022 report, they actually are rated now as medium-low. Okay. So there has been some movement within the sectors. Again, it's been due to a number of different factors. Those factors are outlined in a bit more detail within the 2022 report. It's also as a result of us looking at the sectors in much more granular detail, and also it's a reflection of the amount of work that's been done within the sectors themselves about in terms of them comprehending and understanding their own money laundering risk.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, Monique, I also need to add, in arriving at those ratings, we looked at a lot of data, as I mentioned when we started. Yeah. We sent out questionnaires to the industry to get their feedback on how they saw the risk situation within the jurisdiction as well as within their sectors. The questionnaire, the Survey Monkey questionnaires that we sent out to the industry, we also sent out questionnaires to our law enforcement agencies, to gather their perspective at the national level. We did interviews with some of the key law enforcement agencies to try to understand what their view was from a risk perspective. So there was a lot that went into arriving at the conclusions that we have in the report.
This sounds like a lot so far. So now we need to hear more about what are we doing to fix the various sectors, bringing those that are low to the right level and those that are high, same thing. So now that the report has been published, tell us now what action should the FIs and DNFBs now take? What measures should be put in place?
Right. Well, there are some expectations for all of the sectors, but what we expect the industry to do is to make sure that they review and adjust their policies and their procedures and internal controls to, having regard to the findings of the report. They need to make sure they understand their client risk. They need to make sure that they can demonstrate that the level of client monitoring that they carry out is based on the risks that they've identified. But first and foremost, we really need for these sectors to understand the money laundering risk, not just with their clients' but understand the types of risks that their sectors are susceptible to.
Yes.
You know, understand how their business and their products and services can be used to facilitate money laundering. You know, and they need to be able to identify the types of mitigating measures that they can put in place to stop or to minimize their exposure to that type of risk.
And all of this is within the report. Ms. Fariel, you did mention earlier about the medium-high risk in the, I think it was for the legal practitioners. Tell us a little bit about that. What money laundering risks did you find within this sector?
Okay, so in terms of the medium high risk rating, just to clarify first of all, with respect to the money laundering risks, it doesn't mean that we have found that the Virgin Islands legal practitioner sector
That's why I'm
is
jumping. I'm like,
right. No,
tell
that's not what it means. So that's not what it means. That's not what we found. You know, in terms of that. So taking a step back, legal practitioners undertaking the type of work that we call relevant business, the type of services that they provide, are generally seen as they can't that in itself, the services that they provide and the work that they do just generally can be susceptible to money laundering.
Legal
risk.
practitioners, you're talking about lawyers?
Correct. Undertaking a specific type of work is just correct, and that is seen as being susceptible to money laundering risks, just in general. We have seen that happen across the globe. So that's really what it is, and for that reason, because of the work that they do, they're often referred to as the gatekeepers of the financial services sector.
Okay.
So that's really what it is, and that's our starting point. So we have in the Virgin Islands a decent-sized legal practitioner sector, which is supervised by the Financial Investigation Agency. Now, in undertaking our report, what we really looked at was the size of the sector. We then looked at the types of services that sector is providing, and then we also looked at the clients to whom they might be providing the services, where those clients are based, etc. And looking at all of those things as a whole, it was felt that yes, the sector can be considered as carrying a higher risk, so they came out as a medium high risk to susceptibility. Now, what that really means is that sector just needs to ensure that it is aware that that's the risks that they have, just because that's the services that they provide. Unfortunately, they have been shown to be abused in the past globally. So that sector just needs to ensure that they put in place adequate controls and mitigating measures to be able to prevent those types of abuses happening within their firms.
So these abuses that you find, is it that, I mean, if someone is doing something that is, I mean, between the client and the legal practitioner relationship, you as the financial services or financial investigation agency, what processes do you perform to get in and get that information? Is that an assessment that you do? On your own?
That's something that we would do. In the first instance, it remains the responsibility of the firm, of the legal practitioner, to ensure that they understand the risks and they put in place controls and measures in their firms to protect their firms. And those controls and measures need to be in accordance with our Virgin Islands legislation and our AML code and AML regulations. So that's really what they need to do. But as a supervisory body, the FIA's role would be in relation to, we would undertake our checks to ensure that adequate controls are in place, and we can do those checks using a various different means, including on-site inspections.
That's what I'm trying to get to. How do you know where my clients are or they're coming from? We won't go there. Okay. But what other sectors do we need to be aware of?
Okay, so the other sectors that really should take note of this report is the accountancy profession. Okay. So the accountancy profession, similar to the legal practitioners, are also called the gatekeepers, similarly because of the services that they provide. Even though they were rated in this report as medium low, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have no risk. So the risk of being susceptible to money laundering, unfortunately, always remains. So they need to be aware of what the report says and what are the risks within their sector as well. And similar to the legal practitioners, they then need to put in place adequate controls and measures to protect their firms. And I would also like to take the opportunity to mention the real estate sector. Now, real estate, has been seen globally and has been abused in the past by persons undertaking money laundering or persons wishing to abuse the sector. So real estate agents within the Virgin Islands that are involved in the business of buying and selling transactions on behalf of a client need to also be aware of what this report says. Yes, their rating has moved from medium high to medium low, but again, that doesn't mean that there's no risk. So they do need to be aware of the risks to their business, of the risks to their sector. And it's more so, it's not saying that they are themselves undertaking the money laundering. What this is saying is that they can be susceptible to be abused. So their business themselves might get abused by somebody undertaking a transaction they shouldn't be.
Pretty interesting so far, our discussion on the 2022 Virgin Islands Money Laundering Risk Assessment Report. And that's going to do it for us for part 1. And so look out for part 2.